All right, how's everyone doing? I'm Rich CELENZA. Thanks for tuning into the Rich CELENZA Show. WTF are you talking about? So, what I want this podcast to be about is how I think young men, or men in general, aren't always built for marriage. So, I'll just kind of give you a backstory. I kind of grew up in a divorced household. My mother and father got divorced roughly or separated when I was around 5 years old. So, boo-hoo for me, right? No one gives a shit, especially nowadays, how many parents are divorced. But I grew up in a massive family where my mother and father were really the only ones who were divorced, which actually, in my opinion, worked out really well for me. My mother and father, like a lot of them, they just didn't probably belong together at that point in time. My father owned a nightclub, so did my mother, and then, the lifestyle just, they just went their own ways. That's between them two. But what really worked out for me in hindsight was, one is I ended up with a terrific stepfather, and his family was remarkable. Full-blooded Italians out of, I think they were Napolitan. Were they Sicilian too? Anyways, they lived in Melrose Park, which I ended up living in Melrose Park, which I love that community, especially in the old days, the 70s and 80s with the Italian feasts and the Italian neighborhood. But also because my other aunts and uncles on both sides of my family would always kind of take me in because I was like the odd man out. And they all had big Italian families. So I got to travel with a lot of my uncles, especially my older uncles on my father's side, where a lot of them were wealthy. A lot of them had condos and places in South Florida, and I would travel back and forth with them. Not only that, we had a summer home in Illinois, and we would go back and forth there as well. And my father, that's where actually his club was at, so it kind of worked out really well. They all had boats, Cadillacs, Lincolns. It was just an amazing life. And then on my other side of the family, my mother's, I had some older Italian uncles. Street guys. I love them to this day more than anything. They took me in. They were out of Cicero, really rough guys. I'm not going to say the complete opposite of my other Italian side of the family, but pretty much so. Some, even though I had uncles on both sides that liked to gamble, but on one side I had an uncle that had season tickets to the Chicago Bears football games, like front row. Well, unbelievable. And then my other uncle, too, on my father's side, who was wealthy, who had boats on Lake Michigan, and he loved to take me to High Lie, and like he would go to the Derby. But I'd go to the track with him, and when we were in South Florida, like I was saying, High Lie. And then my other uncles would go to the track as well. Different type of atmosphere. We'd go to see the fights, or I would go to a lot of Italian restaurants in Taylor Street and things like that. More street orientated. More on the street as far as gambling goes as well. And I, for the most part, ended up probably gravitating much more to the street than I did to the higher end, I guess you could say, side, even though I love my father's side of the family very much and their children. But a lot of times you gravitate towards my mother's, which was mainly Cicero and Melrose Park, and a lot of that atmosphere, which I guess you could say was more, I don't know, outfit mob-orientated mentality. Rough, tough guys. And as I got older, and then my father ended up going into the vending business, and then I ended up kind of doing a lot of things with gambling. So, it was a very interesting life I had. My father retired at a young age and then went to Florida. So, when it came to marriage, I actually really wasn't that interested in marriage, but at a young age I met my ex-wife, who's really wonderful, and I dated her a long time, like 8 years, when I moved to Florida. So I was like in my mid-20s, and I was thinking it was time to get married, and I really was ready to get married. I had a lot of issues younger with some arrests and things, and my lifestyle. I was like, I need to shut this down, and I thought it would be a great way to do that, and it was. And I always dreamt of having 2 daughters. And I wrote about it in my high school journal for some reason. And they said my ex-wife would never have children, which was completely ridiculous. She ended up having children. But the first, we lost a set of twins, 2 girls, which I thought that was our shot. But, it never held me back. But I ended up having 2 beautiful daughters. I loved being married. And then the late 90s rolled around, 2009, late 90s, what am I talking about? 2008, 9, I ended up getting a divorce. It was heartbreaking because I really wanted to be the guy who didn't want to kind of get divorced, But after I got divorced, I ended up going working with a bunch of young guys, actually. My father sold his business. I was working at Neiman Marcus, and I was kind of bored out of my mind, even though that's a wonderful company. And I was in the process of trying to raise money for another film I wanted to make, so I went and helped with a valet company in Orlando, and I ended up getting around 40 young guys, which was unbelievable. Got me in incredible shape working valet. I didn't do a ton of running. I ran the front. Still love all those guys, but it was like the second coming of me kind of being free again. Plus, I'm with a bunch of young guys. Technology was really popping then, with websites and social media, and Facebook kind of just came out and all these things, so it was quite interesting. And then I ended up moving to California, of all places, right? And I was bouncing between California and Florida. But being around middle-aged, older, and younger men, lots of them, like hundreds, including my family members, friends, colleagues, I realized, or I think that a lot of times, a lot of men have to realize marriage may not be for them. And I think it's probably the same for women, but I'm not around enough women to speak on a whole, and I'm not speaking for all men or all women. But I think a lot of men aren't ready to get married that get married. And they're not prepared, I think, mentally for what's in store, I guess, or what the future is going to be being married, or how long that is. Because I think a lot of times when we're making these lifelong decisions in our 20s, especially early 20s or mid-20s about getting married, because a lot of people are still getting married between 25 and 30, they don't realize, you got your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, your 70s. And I used to go around and say, when men should start getting married? Around 50, 45 to 50, because that's when they're shutting down. They're relaxed. It seems like they want to stay home more. They want to just kind of settle in with somebody. They're not so caught up in still, I call it the hunt. In my Mastering Self-Confidence program, I teach a program, I don't know if you know this, it's to help men find the woman or women of their dreams, even if they've been through a bad breakup or divorce. And one thing is that they have to become self-aware really of who they are, regardless if they're single, divorced, but they have to have confidence if you plan on meeting a woman or beautiful women. And what I realized teaching this, the more confident I realized a lot of times men become, especially toward women, the more options they want. And it can work in one way if they're truly looking to find a relationship. Let's say they want to settle down and get married, and they want to have the confidence to finally find the right one, which is, I'm all about putting yourself in the right place at the right time, because that's what you're going to have to do to find the right woman, and first figuring out what type of woman you truly want, right? I think a lot of people are afraid. So if you are a white guy, I don't care if you're a black guy, I don't care if you're Hispanic, you have a certain type of woman that you're attracted to. Now, the other thing I teach too is to be open-minded, because you'd be shocked. A lot of times you're always kind of chasing the same type of woman. You don't even realize, hey, over here in left field is somebody I never knew that I would like. It could be an Asian that you'd never, or it could be if you're white, a black woman, whatever the case may be. You've got to realize to be open-minded, but also figure out what you want. Because if you don't know what the hell you want, it's hard to find anything, right? You're kind of, I call it getting in a position where you like who likes you. You do not want to be in that position. You want to find who you like, and in turn, hopefully they'll like you as well. But back to men, I think, are hunters, no matter what anyone tells you. And I don't mean hunters as far as hurting people or killing or none of that. Some hunt to do that with animals, but that's not what I'm saying. I mean, they're kind of on the prowl. What happens, I think, too, with a lot of men is when they're each one kind of falls into a lot of different dynamics. But if you were younger and geeky, or say through high school or college, and you didn't get a lot of women, and you kind of just settled and got married, but then as time went on, you became better looking, which happens to a lot of guys, and more successful, and you start getting a lot more attention, especially from a lot of beautiful women. I think it's very hard for men to turn that down. It's just an honest to God approach on how I feel about that. I really do. I also think dudes that were younger, that were good looking, that were fit or whatever, they get married sometimes, and they get married a little young, and they start having kids or whatever, and they're also continuously getting attention from other women, and it's hard to turn that down, right? I do. I really honestly do. Especially with social media, and I don't think people want to talk about that. And here's the thing, a lot of times with women for the most part, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them are, you know what I mean, they're in the driver's seat a lot of times because they're used to being pursued. Men aren't. And a lot of times as men get older, especially if they become wealthier, and especially if they become more handsome, now they're getting pursued and they're not used to being in that position. And a lot don't know how to handle that. Some do. Some are like, hey, I'm married. Get out of here. But a lot of times they don't know how to handle that, especially if they've been with somebody for a long time. And that doesn't mean that they don't love that person. But I think men and women sometimes have to realize if you've been with somebody 10, 15, 20 years, and you're both exhausted of hearing each other's stories, you're kind of exhausted from fooling around even with one another, or you're exhausted because your kids, you've based your whole life now around your children, and you kind of lost touch with one another. And again, I'm not saying this happens to everybody. There's a lot of incredible marriages out there, so don't think that I'm saying this happens to everyone. But I'm saying this is very common. I think it is hard to expect someone to stay married for life, because life, first of all, I think a marriage contract, I talk about this in my book, The Wingman, I think is invalid from the get-go, because there's no such thing as a contract for life. If it was for life, it can never be broken. But it can be broken, and we all know it can be broken. So it's kind of a con, I think. And that doesn't mean I'm anti-marriage either. God bless anybody who wants to get married. I actually do this thing with my family where I'm going to probably end up doing it next month, where I get up, and our family is so massive, and I have so many family members that have been married from 10 years on all the way up to 65, I think. So after 10 years on, I make the couple stand up and say, hey, they've been married this long, they've been married this long. I do it at weddings, and people go up for grabs, especially for people that have been married over 40 years. It's an amazing thing. But I also think, regarding that, a lot of people stay in marriages for the wrong reasons, and they also are miserable throughout a lot of their life, having to be stuck with someone that they don't really love anymore, or someone they're not interested in anymore. And that's where that contract, I think, gets a little sketchy. And I goofed around and said it should be like a 7-year contract, where every 7 years you're kind of out, right? Like 7 years you get to re-up. Oh, okay, I'll re-up. So in the next 7 years you get to re-up. I'm not re-upping me either. Kind of one of those as a joke. And I used to kind of look at marriage growing up in the nightclub business, or in the bar business till I was 40 years old, from when I was basically born. You see so many relationships, so many breakups, so many heartaches, divorce, cheat, everything. I used to look at it and go, if you're really together and you don't have a piece of paper and you're not married and you stick it out, and either one of you can leave at any moment, right? And I mean, sometimes if you've been with somebody a long time, you have a house with it, whatever. But the truth is, you're not married. If you can dip on this person at any time, that's almost, I think, more of a commitment than just signing a piece of paper like a lot of people do and say, okay, now I'm married. I can either do whatever I want to do as far as, we could kind of, we're stuck together is what I'm saying. And I could do this, I could do that. I'm not saying cheating. I'm just saying just acting a certain way, and you got to put up with each other because now we're married. We're stuck with one another. Where when you're not married, the other person doesn't have to put up with a lot of your bullshit. And I talk about relationships a lot when it comes to being together is basically you saying, how much of your bullshit do I have to tolerate to stay with you? And vice versa, right? And I also used to goof around. I'm going to say something here that I never said before. And I wrote it in my book. And my editor came to me. Actually, she emailed me and said, Rich, this is very offsetting. And it's kind of offensive, I think. And it kind of counters what a lot of things you're saying in the book. And she was right. That's what's amazing about having a great editor. Especially that she was working on my second book. But I used to say this. I can't say I necessarily believe it entirely now. But I seen her point. And I used to say, how much of your bullshit do I have to put up with to fuck you? And I don't mean to shock anybody by saying that, but it goes both ways. Like, if you start fooling around with each other, you're just friends, right? All this shit a lot of times we're putting up with is because we're fooling around with that person. If you took the fooling around aspect out of it, how much bullshit would you put up from that person? Probably very little. But I think a lot of times in marriage, we're kind of forced to say, okay, I got to keep putting up with your bullshit, and you got to keep putting up with mine, right? Just so we could kind of still fool around with each other, or that's still in the cards. But a lot of relationships, once that kind of goes, especially with a woman when she emotionally checks out, but once the effing goes around, everybody stops fucking, that's where it's falling apart. And that's kind of makes sense to a certain degree. Now, some get to rekindle and make it work again. And, I'm not telling anybody to give up. But the truth is, it comes down to sex a lot of times, which is usually, as you get older, the thing you're doing the least, if you really look at it. And what's really amazing to me a lot of times is it goes for men and women is they stop having sex. And then whoever, it could be the guy or the girl, then somebody goes and cheats on them and starts having sex because you're not having sex, and then they're either offended or want to leave you or want to, despise you for doing that when you were not interested in doing it with them in the first place. But again, since you're married, you're not allowed to do that. So basically, you're depriving somebody of sex because you're married, and then you'll despise them for having sex with somebody else. It's very kind of bullshitty. And I understand there's religion involved and all these other things, but you really have to realize, men and women, is it comes down to how much bullshit are you going to put up with this person. And I don't think a lot of young men, even 20s, 30s, 40s even, realize, and women, how much bullshit there's going to be in those years. And when I say bullshit, I don't mean lying and manipulation either, or cheating. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying day-to-day bullshit, listening to people, going through all the issues they're going to have with work. If you have children together, different issues. It could be religious point of views. It could be political. Your in-laws, your friends, right? Including your friends getting married and divorced, including your family members, what all they're going to bring in, all the chaos and drama. Maybe moving different places, one wanting to move, one not wanting to move. It's just going to be a long road. And every decision you make, a lot of times, you have to come together as a decision, which again, I think is very, very hard to do. Let me get some water. It's very hard for two people, especially the opposite sex, to continuously make the same type of decision that works best for both of you. I think a lot of times we just keep giving in. And eventually either one of us quits, or that's where the arguing comes in. And that's what I'm trying to say with men, especially. They don't understand all these things by getting married at a younger age or at a certain age. It could be, again, 20s, 30s, 40s, I think. They're not prepared for that. And I think sometimes, I wanted to be a young father. I wanted to have kids younger. But a lot of guys, you have to realize, do not go into marriage or do not start having children until you really, really are in a place where you're, I think, a lot of times, happy where you're at and kind of just comfortable in your own skin. And I think that happens to a lot of guys, like in their 40s and 50s and up. I don't think a lot of guys in their 20s and 30s, a lot of them, are that, I think they're happy or excited to get married, and then when they do get married, they regret it. And I also think with a lot of women, but it gets a little tougher with women because they want to have children at a certain age. I think if women were able to have kids when they were, if they're like, they can, but I mean, it's riskier, but 40s and 50s, when they're kind of chilling out a little bit, everybody's kind of cool, you know what I mean? A little more financially secure, has dated longer periods of time. Because a lot of times if you've been divorced and you dated someone divorced, it's kind of one of two ways. Either you get caught up with, with their ex's bullshit and the kids and all that craziness, or the second go around, or dating somebody who's been divorced, they know the game. They know all the bullshit. They're kind of like exhausted from it. They just want it to be cool. They don't want to argue over stupid shit. They just want to make sure their kids are doing well, educated. They know how to behave themselves. They know what's worth the argument and what isn't. But I think a lot of times in our 20s and 30s, and even 40s sometimes, men, a lot of times they're still, I'm not going to say on the hunt, but they still have a lot of energy. And I think, too, I've realized a lot of my friends, they have a lot of things that they want to get done, I guess you could say. And a lot of times, like in their 20s, they're just starting their careers. A lot of them don't even know what they're doing. Even in their 30s, they're changing careers, or they're trying to still figure things out. And then kind of in their 40s, they're settling in and saying, okay, I'm cool. I already did that. I already traveled, or I already lived there, and I did that already, or I tried this business. I didn't like it. Now I'm in here. And it's just a lot more fluent. and a lot more relaxed, I think. So that is just my perception on this regarding, men really think about it, and women too. Marriage is it's a long game, and I know I could just speak from a lot of my girl cousins and stuff. I know they want to get married at a young age too, to start a big family and things, which is great. I've seen that work out. I've seen it blow up in a lot of others' faces, kind of forcing men or trapping men, or a lot of different things women can do, and a lot of men do shit too to force women to marry them and whatever. If you've got to do any of that shit, I mean, good luck with that. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But really think of your future and look at your life sometimes from a hindsight point of view. Like, if you don't know what you're doing, if you're more interested in your career at the point when you're kind of thinking of getting married, or you're more interested in, or if you're thinking about moving to another state, city, country, and you haven't done it yet, you may want to get that shit out of your system, because a lot of times it doesn't go. And a lot of times I think we've been programmed to say, hey, if we're not married by this, by this year or this, or have kids by this time, that, all that, you most likely will have time for that. Make sure you get all, I'd hate to say it, but you've got to take care of you. You almost have to look at a self-centered type of thing, because there's a lot of things guys and girls I know that want to do in their 20s and 30s. They don't do it, and then they regret it. Or a lot of women, and I've seen this happen too, where they do end up getting married, having kids, giving up their careers, ending up in a divorce in their late 30s or in their early 40s. Now they gave up their career, or they gave up their further education and all this. Now they're stuck with shitty jobs, or they're just stuck in a position where they're like, man, I should have just waited 5 years to get married, or I should have waited to my 30s, or I could have did this or that. Now, if we have children, nobody's going to give up their children. I don't mean that. But I'm just saying, if you're in that position, think, become self-aware. I've been talking about it a lot, is make sure that, marriage may be on your list of things to do, but a lot of times you may think it's a lot higher on the list than it really is, because there's other things that you want to do, and definitely try to do them, or at least go after them, right? All right, I'm going to leave it at that. All right, I hope these guys aren't thinking, Jesus Christ, you're throwing us under the bus here. I'm not at all. Just please make sure when it comes to marriage, because I think as time goes on too, especially with social media, apps, all this, it's going to be harder and harder to stay married. I just think it's that obvious. I'm older now. I can care less about any of that shit, but I couldn't imagine if I was in my 20s, 30s, or 40s, because access is everything. And just because maybe if you're a guy or girl listening to this, you're like, hey, I get married, it's for life, I don't cheat. That doesn't mean whoever you're with isn't going to cheat on you or leave you for someone else, or not be in love with you after a certain amount of time. You have to understand that most likely may happen, or is going to happen, probably more than it is not going to happen. Because if you look at the average stat of marriage, they claim it's 55% divorce. I heard that's a lie. It's more like 65-ish, even higher. They don't want you to know that. The divorce rate just keeps increasing. So I don't know. And again, that doesn't mean we're bashing marriage. It just may have to be a little more realistic to say, hey, the average marriage now lasts 15, 20 years. It's not going to be the average marriage lasting, say, 50 to 70 years. I think we all have to really kind of agree upon that, because just look at the stats again, and look at the way. And again, it doesn't matter how long you're married to. And I think a lot of us wrap our identities around marriage too. Again, don't do that to yourself. Don't feel like you're insecure if you're not married, and then if you do get married, that you can never get divorced again, and you have to live this miserable life with somebody you don't want to be with anymore, right? And vice versa. So, all right, if you get a chance, you could check out all this stuff on my Mastering Self-Confidence program, masteringselfconfidence.com, or go to richcelenza.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I've been putting a lot of videos up on YouTube regarding fitness, including all my favorite gyms. And listen, if you disagree with me, I get it. I'd love to hear comments. If you agree with me, that's cool too. Whatever. But I want everyone to know for sure I am not against marriage. You have to realize I'm not against what anybody wants to do. I just want to make sure people protect themselves. That goes for men and women. Don't get fooled. Don't get conned. And protect yourself, because nobody else is going to protect you a lot of times except yourself. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. Take care, and I wish you nothing but the best.